So fellas, obviously over the weekend we saw Islam Makhachev beat Renato Moicano to remain the lightweight champion, but I feel like there's a big problem with Islam Makhachev's title run. I feel like no matter who he beats during his title run, there's always some sort of excuse, whether it be on Twitter or whatever it may be. There's always people that kind of bring up an excuse for every Makhachev win. Like, he'll get a win and people will complain about the opponent that he's beaten, or they'll say that it wasn't impressive for whatever reason. And I feel like despite Islam Makhachev doing the well, I mean, he's pound for pound #1. He's got a bit of a cursed title run. So he wins the belt by beating Charles Oliveira, and then he instantly defends against Alexander Volkanovski, which is quite a big defense for your first title defense. Volkanovski at the time was in his prime. Looked unstoppable. It was pound for pound #1. And this is a huge fight. Champ versus champ. Double champ status for Volk potentially. And it's a massive fight that everyone can't wait for. And the fight lives up to the hype. It ends up being fight of the year contender for 2023. It's an amazing fight. Back and forth fighting. Islam Makhachev wins a close decision. And then rather than people, accepting the fact that it was potentially fight of the year 2023 candidate, the immediate thing that people are saying is it's a robbery. It's a complete robbery. Makhachev shouldn't have won the fight. Fake champion. Alexander Volkanovski won. And by the way, it wasn't a robbery. I thought Makhachev won. It was definitely a close fight, but I definitely thought that Makhachev deserved to win that fight. And then in the lightweight division, the two rightful contenders were Charles Oliveira and Beneil Dariush. That materializes into a #1 contender fight. Oliveira finishes Dariush. And then we get to see the two guys rematch with Islam Makhachev and Charles Oliveira. That materializes for UFC 294. And again, we're looking forward to this fight. Oliveira's the next contender. He's earned it. And then Oliveira pulls out. On 10 days' notice, Oliveira pulls out. So on 10 days' notice, Makhachev's got the option to fight Gamrot or a rematch with Alexander Volkanovski. Now, considering that Gamrot had won 2 of his last 3 and both of those 2 wins were kind of controversial, and Volkanovski had that close fight with Makhachev and just finished Yair Rodriguez, the fight between Volkanovski and Islam Makhachev gets made, as it should. The fight gets made, the fight starts, Makhachev knocks him out in the first round, knocks out the striker, gets the win. Now, this time the excuse, obviously, it can't be a robbery because he just knocked him out. The other excuse is now that it's on short notice. Volkanovski, he stepped in on short notice, on 10 days' notice. The first time he fought Volkanovski, it was a close fight. This time it was short notice, so people wanted to discredit him. And then people started kind of discrediting his whole title run, saying that his title run, he hasn't fought a real lightweight yet. He's got a title run full of 145. There's no fresh names. It's just Alexander Volkanovski all over again, even though Makhachev's just signed to fight everybody put in front of him. And then you go back to the lightweight division. You've got a couple of contenders in the lightweight division, but it can't be Justin Gaethje because he's just been knocked out by Max Holloway, and Holloway's decided that he's going to move back down to 145 to face Poirier. And Tsarukyan and Oliveira were booked for UFC 300 for what was seeming to be a #1 contender fight, leaving the only contender at the time being Dustin Poirier. So that fight gets made. Makhachev versus Poirier, UFC 302. And again, fight of the year contender for 2024. It was an amazing back and forth fight. One of the best fights. Islam Makhachev definitely won most of the rounds, but it was still a very kind of back and forth fight where Islam Makhachev inevitably submits Dustin Poirier. And then the excuse this time around is that it took him 5 rounds to beat Dustin Poirier. Poirier took him into deep waters. Poirier isn't even the top contender, and that's what he can do to Islam Makhachev. And this is the new excuse for Islam Makhachev after he beats Dustin Poirier, that it wasn't as dominant as Khabib. And then he finally gets to fight with Tsarukyan. Tsarukyan's beaten Oliveira. He's ready to fight. He's a legitimate #1 contender. There's no excuses. He's definitely earned himself a title shot. He's ranked #1 in the lightweight division. And that fight gets made UFC 311. And everyone can't wait for it. Makhachev's 4th title defense against Tsarukyan, the guy that everyone wants to see him face, the toughest test for him in the division. And then one day before the fight, Tsarukyan pulls out due to a back injury, which a lot of people have kind of given Makhachev a lot of slack for, meaning the only 2 opponents he can possibly fight on a day's notice could be Beneil Dariush and Moicano, who are competing on the card. And considering that Dariush was on a 2-fight losing streak and hadn't competed for pretty much a year, and Renato Moicano was on a 4-fight winning streak, the dude Moicano versus Makhachev, as expected, the fight starts, Makhachev takes him down, submits Moicano, and gets a dominant win. And now the excuse is that it was always going to happen. It's an easy legacy. And people are kind of just discrediting his entire title run. It seems like every single time he gets a win, there's always some sort of excuse to his opponent on how he performed against that certain opponent, rather than people just acknowledging that he's running through these lightweights like a hot knife through butter. And I remember when people calling him boring as well, saying that he's a boring champion when he first won the belt. And then you look at him now, and the majority of his wins are by finishes. He's had 2 fight of the year contenders as well. If anything, he's one of the most entertaining in the UFC. And you fast forward to the lightweight division nowadays, he's in this tough spot again because Tsarukyan's probably not going to be fighting for the belt next because Dana White insists that he's going to have to fight his way back for the belt. Gaethje, Poirier, and Holloway, I doubt they're going to be fighting for a belt next, meaning that Oliveira's next. And you know what? I agree with that Oliveira rematch. Oliveira finished Dariush, had a very close fight with Tsarukyan and just dominated Michael Chandler. But I can almost guarantee the excuses this time around is that it's going to be a title run full of pure rematches. Nobody cares because you've already beat Charles Oliveira. It's going to go the same way the first fight did. Fight a fresh name. And there's nothing Makhachev can really do in the 155 division. He's signed to fight everybody put in front of him. It's just the opponents are pulling out or situations getting in the way. And you look at other champions in different divisions and the way it's going for them. You look at Ilia Topuria. He fights Volkanovski for the belt and he makes history. First man to beat Volkanovski in the featherweight division, knocks out the featherweight GOAT, did what no featherweight could, then he faces Max Holloway. First man to knock out Max Holloway in MMA history, outboxes the UFC's boxer and gets arguably the two best back-to-back wins in UFC history. Even Dricus du Plessis, I know this wasn't for the belt, but beats Robert Whittaker in one of 2023's biggest underdog wins. Break Whittaker's second best middleweight period, where everyone thought he was the second best middleweight. Knocks him out. Then he faces Strickland for the belt. Proves that he had a gas tank where people thought the second he got 5 rounds, he's dead. Goes to war with Strickland. Then he faces Izzy, wins as an underdog. Only other guy to finish is the outsider Poaton. Massive win over a middleweight legend. Whereas Islam Makhachev, no one's really giving him credit, and he's not really having these moments. And people keep comparing him to Khabib as well. It doesn't help that there's always constant Khabib comparisons after every performance. People say that he's nowhere near as dominant as Khabib. Khabib was way more dominant, and people saying that Khabib's still the lightweight GOAT. It seems like every single time Makhachev wins a fight, the conversation of if he's the lightweight GOAT always gets brought up. And I feel like nowadays he has surpassed Khabib, but again, it doesn't help that he's always compared to him as well. And at least Khabib, even when Khabib retired, there was still competition for him in the lightweight division. You know, Tony Ferguson was still floating about. Oliveira was on the come up. Michael Chandler was coming over to the UFC. Even a potential super fight between Khabib and Kamaru Usman that a lot of people were talking about at the time as well. Whereas Makhachev, he's not really had any of these chances that he's been able to take for his own legacy. And again, most champions, double champ status. When Adesanya cleared out the middleweight division, he got to fight Jan Blachowicz. When Volkanovski cleared out the featherweight division, he fought Islam Makhachev. Islam Makhachev, there was a big rumoured title fight between him and Leon Edwards. Leon gets dominated by Belal Muhammad, and now that Belal Muhammad is the champion, it's not even like Makhachev can make history and move up a weight class, because him and Belal Muhammad are training partners. It's very unlikely that those two guys are going to fight each other. And a fight between him and Topuria, which is like the next big fight that everyone's talking about, the super fight with Topuria coming up. A lot of people, including myself, feel like Topuria's still got a lot of work to do in the featherweight division, and that fight's not going to be made. So he's in this tough career spot with Islam Makhachev where he's actually got quite a bit of a boring title run. And I'm not calling him a boring fighter. Like I said, he's had multiple Fight of the Year contenders recently, and he's one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC. He's one of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC, but the title run itself, because of the lack of competition, it is quite boring. Like, who does he fight next? Max Holloway, he'd run through Max Holloway. He's already ran through Dan Hooker, and he'd do it again. Charles Oliveira, I do believe the second fight would be more competitive, but he's beaten him before, and I think he'd do it again. So he's in this weird position now where the three biggest threats to Makhachev, I'd say, are Arman Tsarukyan, but Tsarukyan probably doesn't get another title shot because he pulled out last minute. Ilia Topuria, but Topuria's still got work to do in the featherweight division. And potentially Belal Muhammad, where he can make history and win 2 belts. But that fight ain't going to happen unless Belal Muhammad loses his belt, because obviously Belal Muhammad and Islam Makhachev are close. So he's in this weird spot where there isn't like an exact fight for Makhachev for him to really make a name for himself and put a stamp on his legacy. Which is a shame, because he's got so many ranked wins as well. Even outside of the title run, the amount of ranked wins that he's beaten is crazy. And that's not even counting the likes of Tsarukyan and Tsarukyan's debut and Bobby Green and Drew Dober. He's actually got a really good resume in the lightweight division. So what I think the best course of action to do for Islam Makhachev's career right now would be to do Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira 2. Do the rematch. It's the only real fight that's left for Islam Makhachev. Not that he hasn't beaten, obviously, Oliveira before, but if you look at the current state of the lightweight division, I'd say Oliveira's the surging contender. In summertime, do this in summer of 2024. It kind of, at 5, it makes sense. Oliveira's just got a dominant win over Michael Chandler. Before that, he arguably beat and obviously lost to Tsarukyan, and before that, he finished Dariush. A rematch that a lot of people have been waiting for. Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira. And in the meantime, you let Ilia Topuria get going in the featherweight division. Make him defend his belt against a featherweight contender, probably against Movsar Evloev. I don't know if they're going to do the Volkanovski rematch, and if he does rematch Volkanovski, I don't think he's again cleared out the division enough to move up, and Diego Lopez are probably going to be taking on Yair Rodriguez. So maybe do Ilia Topuria versus Movsar Evloev in the first half of 2025, just to give him that extra defense. And then if that happens and they're both still the champion, maybe then we can have the conversation about Makhachev versus Topuria as like a champion versus champion matchup. And I do believe that this will be a big winner for Islam Makhachev, because, you know, Topuria is one of the best in the world right now, and if he can keep defending in the featherweight division, I think this is a huge fight. Maybe squeeze it in late 2025 or early 2026. And then in terms of Tsarukyan, you do Tsarukyan versus another lightweight contender, whether it be against Oliveira if Oliveira loses to Islam in the rematch, whether it be against the winner of Justin Gaethje and Dan Hooker. Tsarukyan, let him face another lightweight contender, and then get a title fight. And if this obviously does happen and Makhachev's still the champion, he would have had 2 more defenses against Charles Oliveira and Ilia Poirier, 2 very respectable names. Belal Muhammad, there's a chance that he might not even be the welterweight champion anymore, so Makhachev might move up. And if he is the welterweight champion, there's always Tsarukyan, who would have got an extra win to make the fight even bigger than it was, well, what was going to be at UFC 311. But that's just my current thoughts on Islam Makhachev's title run. I feel like he's in this weird career spot where he's getting disrespected for his title run, and there's just a big problem going on with it. So let me know your thoughts on the current state of the lightweight division and more importantly, the current state of Makhachev's title run. And thank you for watching.